is just purely focused on the 17th. So we had an opening spread. This was the sort of like makeshift memorial that went up outside of our school, and I think this was shot by a yearbook photographer. Like Sarah said, we really shared our resources after everything that happened. We both had students that were out shooting and documenting because that's what felt right to them, and then we had other kids who they weren't ready, so we weren't able to fully rely on our entire staff to be working because not everybody was in a position where they felt comfortable doing anything. And Sarah and I kind of both took the same approach. We were like, if you're not ready, you're not ready, and whenever you are ready, you'll work. And then other people kind of picked up the slack for the people that kind of weren't ready. So this is how we opened the issue. And then we did 2 pages for everyone, and we tried to make them kind of simple but impactful. We really tried to choose a photo that kind of captured them, and so my editor-in-chief, one of them, she was the sort of the driving force behind the philosophy behind this issue, which was that we wanted to capture who they were and what they meant to their friends and their family and what our community had lost. So that was the approach we took with all of them, and they were hard because just like with the families, were in various stages of grieving, and some people wanted to talk to us and some didn't. And for some of them, we got things that at the very, very last minute, we were able to reach a parent or we were able to reach someone. But it was, it was the hardest thing I think I've ever done in my career. So, and then we ended with some poetry. There are 3 pieces on here. The 3 on the left, one was written by Alex Schachter, one was written by Joaquin, and one was written by Carmen Shentrup. And so these were, at the time, we were getting ready to submit things to the county's literary fair, and so all the English teachers were sort of collecting all these pieces. And when we came back, here were these pieces, these things that these students who had passed away had written, and so it just felt right. It just felt right to include it. And this photo that's in the background was taken by a yearbook photographer. So yeah. Sure. And then, so then our next issue was all about activism, and the woman who our school is named after, her name is Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and she was an environmentalist and a journalist and an activist. So it's kind of appropriate that a movement formed out of our school when our founder was an activist and a journalist. So we opened it with with activism. The first spread is about Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, because she's our legacy, and then the next was just talking about activism and the ways that students can be active, and how the different major we had media passes. We were in the media area, and there was a huge march that shut down the city. They had to close all these roads for all these people that participated, and so we were there to I think a lot of these pictures are yearbook. They were there, and then came the walkout. So we were just sort of documenting kind of all these topics that were important to students at the time that had to do with activism. And then all these organizations, all these different organizations, because March for Our Lives was a very tight-knit group of 24, 25 kids. And our school is 3,300 people. And you can't run a movement with 3,300 people in it, right? Too many cooks in the kitchen. So there were all these kids who were really passionate, about gun control and what should happen. And so they started their own organizations. So we sort of looked at all the different organizations that had sprung up in addition, to March for Our Lives, Students for Change, and the drama program that started MSD Shine, Price for Our Lives. And then there was no way we weren't wading into gun control. So we put, for some of our kids, images of guns and things is like a triggering thing. So we made sure that we put a trigger warning in front of it, like don't go any farther, you know, if this is gonna bother you. And that was important to us because you have to be mindful of your community. Like this is something that everyone wants to talk about, but you have to remember that there are people there that don't want to talk about it and they don't want to see those graphic images. And so we were very mindful of the community in that way. And so also, you know, we have a really good relationship with our administration. I mean, we've had some run-ins in the past. They weren't particularly fond of our vaping issue, but so we sort of have this relationship where when we're going to run something controversial, we we allow them to see it because our principal says, you know, his philosophy is he just wants to know about it when a parent calls. And, you know, he pretty much tells them, like, this is a student-run publication, and, you know, these are what, you know, this is what the students, you know, wanted to talk about, and I think our program is really good about doing responsible journalism, and so they back us, but they can't back us if the issue comes out and they haven't had time to look at it yet and they don't know what's in it, then they can't necessarily back us, and then they have no idea what's going on. So it's a lot easier for them to deal with an irate parent. So they don't preview our issue, but when we run something controversial. So this was something that we, like, ran by them, and our principal was like, well, I mean, there are guns, like that's a thing, so how are we going to tell you not to put images of you know, guns? So we ran with that, and then we looked at, you know, all different you know, things related to guns. We talked about smart guns and like whether or not that was like kind of like the future, you know, biometrics that allow only, you know, the person whose gun it is to use the gun, like make them safer in terms of like people picking them up and you know, accidental shootings. We kind of try to look at like all different angles of you know, gun violence, not just mass shootings, because there's all different aspects to this issue. So we tried to look at those, and then we looked at the NRA. We looked at the law that makes them immune to being sued, like for their product and the way their product is used. And then this was, okay, so this is our manifesto. I know that like the Second Amendment people love this because it like screams socialism, but like we didn't really term it this. So when we were working with the Guardian, they wanted like kind of like, what is like your 10-point plan? Like if you could solve gun violence, like what would you want to see? And it was like a group editorial, like this is from our editorial board. And so, and they wanted to call it the manifesto. So that's kind of how it rolled out on the Guardian's website. So then when we, and then there was some criticism and some pushback on it, and we looked at the things that kind of like our critics said, and then when we ultimately put it in print, they amended some of their things because some people made comments about the things that they were suggesting, and they were like, well, we didn't really mean it that way, that's not what we were saying, and so they kind of like fine-tuned it so it was a little bit more clear about what they were saying. But like I told them they shouldn't be like, we've never done these sort of editorial board editorials. We've always run like these pro-cons. Someone writes a pro and someone writes a con. And we had never really done this before. And I told them it was okay to do this. Like editorial boards have opinions. Like local papers and national papers, they run their editorial board's opinion all the time. And they were like kind of afraid to do it. And I was like, do you all feel this way? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so then run your editorial because this is how you feel. And you know, there, of course, like on social media, like always, like some things got posted about it or whatever, but I think the kids have done a good job of developing a pretty thick skin about what gets said about us on social media. And then we ran guest editorials, and it was the first time we ever ran guest editorials, which is now something that we're doing, because sometimes we don't have somebody on staff that like feels that way, and so I can't make a kid write an editorial about something that they like really don't support and whatever, so we're starting to invite people to write guest editorials. So we had somebody write, somebody who, one of these editorials, he lost his sister in the shooting, and he's, you know, his family is, you know, pro Second Amendment, and they don't see gun control as the answer, and so he kind of wrote his opinion. And then we had somebody from Miami who was shot a few years ago about, you know, like her community and how like her shooting pretty much like went ignored. And we had somebody from the building, like who was in the 1200 building, because a lot of those people were very quiet initially because obviously they were dealing with the most significant trauma, right, about how they felt. And so we just invited these other voices into our publication, which was really important to us because, you know, that was one of the big things, is that a lot of the March for Our Lives kids, most of them, maybe all of them, they weren't in the 1200 building on the day of the shooting. And so a lot of the kids who were, the 800 or 900 who were, felt like their voices were going unheard. And then also our African American community in our school, minority voices felt like they weren't heard either. And so we were trying to give voice to those students who didn't have a voice, and that was important to us. And then we did a piece about gun violence in general and sort of like what's going on in urban communities and how those sort of shootings are different from mass shootings and what are some of the solutions that are working in those communities to curb gun violence. And so, because that's another criticism that we get, that the people are only looking at mass shootings and that gun violence is bigger than that. And like we recognize that, and we wanted to cover that as part of the issue. It was a huge issue, and it had no ads. So then we did a thing on school safety. So none of our last 2 issues had ads in it. We just didn't know how to run ads. Like, how do you run an advertisement along this stuff? Like, I don't know, we just couldn't do it. So we just didn't run any ads, and whatever, it was expensive, and we just paid for it. I don't know. It just seemed like the right thing to do. And that was the thing. Like, what felt right to us is what we did. And so, we just had conversations about what felt right to us as a board and what felt right, in the school climate and to our community. And that's kind of like, we made all our decisions sort of out of that, like, feeling of empathy towards our community and what was important. And that's kind of what guided our decisions. So those are our last 2 issues of the school year. Oh, you went to our website. Yeah. My multimedia editor is really unhappy about that box. You can't get it off. So anyway, this is our website, and we added the MSD Strong tab after everything that happened in politics and activism. We added, and we have 2 newspaper classes. We have an AD block, one's on A Day, one's on B Day, and they share responsibilities. One quarter, one will run the online website, and another quarter, and then the other class will do print, and then they swap back and forth so that they get experience doing both online and print. And so, this is our website. And we have Humans of MSD. We have a lot, and we had featured Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg, like, on our Humans of MSD, like, long before, like, any of this stuff happened. So then after the shooting happened and they became, like, these huge sort of, like, polarizing figures, somehow everyone found them on Humans of MSD, and we ended up with, like, thousands of followers, which was just sort of like this weird thing. And then we were on there kind of like deleting all these like hateful comments that people were leaving towards them. That's one of the things I don't understand, is that, like, these people are kids, and some of the horrible, hateful things that were said to them on the internet, because people can hide behind their computer screens, like, that was probably one of the most difficult things that our community dealt with. They wanted to be outspoken, they wanted to be heard, and they dealt with such negativity on the internet. It was hard for a lot of them. So.
This was very impromptu. She was not prepped that she was going to be jumping in on the presentation. But I'm glad she's here, because it shows you not just what we did in the yearbook, but what the newspaper staff did as well. Side note, Melissa and I have been friends since high school. I know, isn't that adorable? We went to high school together. I'm 2 years older, but she's like 2 feet taller. But the fact that we were roommates in headquarters really made it easy, because we are friends, and after living together like that, we're still friends. And we were able to share resources in a loving, positive way. So I know that we got started late. I don't want to hold up the person who's coming in after me. So I do want to thank you, the lucky ones who got to stay, for being here. And I hope you found this useful and enjoyable. So thank you.
Yeah, it might be hard because it's so long.